Hello and welcome to my January 2020 review video. I've got a lot to go through. I think, especially with books, this coincided with my end of the year vacation and I cranked out a lot of books after the new year and even before that. So got a lot of books to go through, got some movies to talk about, and actually got some musical stuff too I'm going to go over. So lots to go through. So let's start. Okay, I think I'm also going to have images of all the things I'm going to show, because some of them, like with books, I have them, and with other things I don't, but also just have a image that's going to go right there, I believe, if I point it to the right side. So I'll have that up briefly as I go through all this stuff. So the first thing I'm going to go through are two books. I got kind of on an Alien kick, so I blasted through three of them. The first two I'm going to go through are Alien Prototype, and also Alien the Cold Forge. So these two books. Generally, Alien books, I'm a big Alien fan, and generally Alien books are pretty easy to get through. Not that the authors aren't like dismissing their abilities or anything like that. It's just they're typically kind of the same story told over and over again. Not too much, but kind of. And they're just pretty straightforward and you know, I can, if I got a day of my time, I can blast through them. I will say, though, that with these two books, there's been a couple I've read in the Alien series, like the novelization of Alien Isolation. I didn't like. I generally just did not like that book. These two I liked for different reasons. The Cold Forge I kind of like because none of the characters were like the classical, you're going to root for this character. The main character that's introduced as you start the story is not a good person. A lot of the people in the space station are, you know, they all have their flaws. And I kind of like that the book had all their characters as not too stereotypical of this is the good person or this is the bad person. So I kind of like that. Had the same story of they're testing aliens and things go bad and blah, blah, blah. But I think generally it was done pretty well. So I enjoyed that. Prototype was also good for the sheer reason that they throw this kind of twist on the alien in terms of the facehugger infecting a person that's been infected with something previously that they were doing tests on humans before, and it ends up with this alien that's just truly kind of horrific. They are, you know, but there's a special twist on the alien in this case. So yeah, I thought that was actually kind of interesting as terms of what they did there, and made the story again a little bit more with a twist because of what they had to combat with the alien and what the alien was also doing. So if you're a fan of the Alien series and the Alien universe, check them out. They were pretty good, and I enjoyed them. Next thing I'm going to talk about is a board game. I have them all upstairs, but I didn't bring them down with me to do it, but it's called Q-bitz. And Q-bitz was a game that my wife actually asked for Christmas. And basically you get like this little board of 4x4 cubes. And these little cubes that go on the board each have like a different shape on them. Either it's all white or it's all got because there's like red and purple and green. So each person gets a different color. So on one side of the cube, it's like all white. The other side is all that color. Another one is like got the colored circle with the white background. Another one has a reverse, and then there's a slash in there, and so on. The point is that you flip over this card, and then everybody, like in one round, will try to match what they see on that card with the cubes as fast as they can. Another round, you put the card up, and then everybody has to shake their dice. Or their cubes, and then whatever matches what the card is there, you put those down, and then you keep shaking your cubes and rolling them until you can get all the matches on your card. And then another one, you have to memorize the card for 10 seconds, put it down, and then you start building it as fast as you can from memory. It's funny because my wife, I think, wanted this game because she thought, oh, she's artistic and she'd be able to handle the images faster than I could, but that hasn't been the case. So we played it a couple times. It's kind of fun. It does get a little repetitive after a while, but I think it's just a fun game that you can play a little bit with friends. And I can imagine if you had a little bit to drink, you might have more of an experience with the game. So very simple, very straightforward, but it's a speed game, and it has its kind of charm. So that's Q-bitz. Okay, the next thing I'm going to go over is a book called King's X, The Oral History. So if you've never heard of King's X before, what is wrong with you? They are one of the best bands ever to grace the face of this earth, and they should have been far more successful than what they ended up being. I remember listening to them. I think was it in high school when I first heard Gretchen Goes to Nebraska? I can't remember for sure, but they had such a different sound, and they were so unique, and they were a little progressive, but they were so different, and their music was so memorable. And it's sad that they did not get the publicity and the exposure that I think they should have. They're a phenomenally good band. And so this is actually a book from all the three members of the band. I usually talk about how Rush is one of those few bands that's been around with the same lineup for 40 years. And you think about King's X, and they've been around with the same three people, Doug, Ty, and Jerry, ever since its incarnation, and even before the band was officially called King's X. So their ability to stay together through all that time is a testament, I think, to just them being a good band. But all three of them and some other people that knew the band or threw in their 2 cents as well are in this book. If you're not a fan of King's X, I would still recommend getting this book because it has such a deep historical span across the band's history from all three members and other people, and it's really cool to get that insight as to how things progressed, kind of why they didn't get the fame that, again, I think and many other people think that they justly deserved, and how that frustrated them and got them kind of, well, why does it matter if we're making a new album? Because nobody's going to listen to it anyway. Yet they still came out with some stuff that I thought was really cool. So I think that was, it's a wonderful book. Highly recommend it, especially if you're a fan of rock and roll in general. It's a really insightful book into the band's history, so definitely recommend that. All right, next up is a movie that I watched called, and I think this is ironic because my background on my computer that I'm looking at right now is a lighthouse. It's a great picture that somebody that I follow on Twitter took, and I snagged it because it's just amazingly cool looking. But this is the movie The Lighthouse, which has Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson. I'm sorry if I'm getting his name wrong. Basically just those two people in this whole movie. Done by, I think Eggers is his name, who also did The Vivitch, or The Witch, which I personally really, really enjoyed. I love that movie. So stylish. And this is basically along the same veins. It's not the widescreen. It's basically a square view, and it's black and white, and it's just these two people. And the acting is superb. I think it's been an injustice that Dafoe didn't get nominated as Best Actor or Best Supporting Actor, however you would view it. Maybe he wouldn't win it, but what he does in the movie, and then no discredit to Pattinson, no discredit to Robert. I think he does a good job too. But Willem, man, he was so good in this movie. It's a little disturbing, to say the least, in some parts. Basically, Robert plays a character that goes to this island that has a lighthouse that he has to maintain with this other guy for 4 weeks, and they're isolated, and it's cold, and it's dreary, and you start finding out weird things going on there. But Willem just does this almost stereotypical view, like, "Arr, pirate you mateys," and stuff, but he does it so well, I thought. I thought he did a really, really good job. So I get that the movie may not be for everybody, but I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought, it was done really, really well. And if you kind of like the spooky and the weird and somewhat disturbing, but good acting in general, this is a good movie to watch. Okay, next up is Spook. by Mary Roach. So, my wife and I think I read the book too that she wrote on, I think it's called Stiff. It's basically about dead people and how we handle, people that have died. And I thought that was kind of interesting. This book, I have to admit, was kind of a slog to get through. I really, it's about her investigation into people that believe in all things paranormal and superstitious and ghosts and things like that. I don't know why, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. And not to I'm looking up the last thing that she says here, but she says at the end, and I know if you don't want the spoiler at the end, there's a spoiler, but I am going to say this quickly at the end. The debunkers are probably right, but there's no fun to visit a graveyard. Let me say it again. The debunkers are probably right, but they're no fun to visit a graveyard with. What the hell? I believe in ghosts. Come on. Even if that's said jokingly, I don't believe in the supernatural. I don't think that we have things as ghosts or anything like that. So I thought it was somewhat of an interesting dive into certain, groups or cultures, or however you want to phrase it, of people that do these kind of paranormal investigations or other things related to that. But I don't know. Wasn't a book that I particularly enjoyed, and I don't really have a good reason as to why. Just kind of fell flat to me. Next up, Wither. This is kind of a horror book, which is set in a town, I think in Rhode Island or somewhere in, Massachusetts. Windale. So, there's basically three main characters. There's a girl, 8 years old. There's the main character. She's like a college student who's the daughter of the president of the college. And then the third one, she's a teacher at the college. And all three of them are starting to get these weird visions of witches and things that happened in the past of the town. And I'll kind of leave the plot there. It's an okay book. I didn't dislike it, but I found out that there's sequels to the book, and I really don't have an interest in reading those either. I didn't feel like the story ends on kind of an end note, and so I'm kind of where do you take one of these characters, at least one of them, in the future? So, it's okay. I'm not going to run out and say people should read this. It's highly recommended, but if you find it and you start reading it, keep going. It's not a bad book. It's just kind of one of those in-between books. I got through it. I was still interested in it, but there's other ones I've read that I think are better. So it's kind of in the middle there. Next up is a board game called Element that I've had for a while, but we've never gotten around to playing it. So my wife and I played it one night, and it's basically this board game where you get, if I remember it, you get these tokens, and you also have these two little, if you're playing two people, you have two figures, otherwise there's three or four, and you try moving them around the board so that you don't get trapped while you try to trap your opponent by putting down different element stones, air, earth, fire, and water, and they have different rules about how one can cancel out the other, and how you make fire lines, and make a water river, and all this other stuff. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun game. I like abstract board games. I'm not a big fan of board games that get really complicated with tons of rules, and it takes 2 hours just to set the damn game up. That's just not quite my thing. Usually, I like more abstract board games, and this kind of fits into that, no pun intended, element. But it's a fun game. I enjoyed it. I think it does take a little bit to keep in mind all the rules about what cancels what and how you can move across the board, but it seems like it gets very quickly. It felt like you can suddenly get into a trap if you're not careful. So you have to balance your moves with your opponents and making sure you always have outs while trying to trap them at the same time. So it was a fun game. All right, next up is one of two instruments I just bought this month. I've been getting back into a kick of music. I have instruments that I've played for years, but in all honesty, in the last 2 or so years, I've kind of just noodled with them. I haven't really seriously played them, especially my drum set. So I have a bunch of new heads for all of my drums, and that's going to be something I do this year, is put new heads on all my drums and really practice more on that, and getting back into music. So I went to, because I asked a friend of mine, well, what site can I go to get all this stuff? And he said, go to Sweetwater. So I went to Sweetwater, and then I got a little out of hand. So one of the first things I got, make sure I don't hit my wall over here, is this 5-string Steinberger bass. I've always wanted a Steinberger. Because when I first got into Rush, Geddy was playing a Steinberger, and he only played it for like a tour. And, he said it really just didn't fit his style or whatever. But I always thought that they were kind of cool looking. I don't know why, I just always did. So it's not the black 4-string that he had, nor was it the original, but it's still a Steinberger. And I've been playing it, noodling it with it off and on, and I love it. I really, really like the feel of it. There's one weird thing that if I play the G string away at the 12th fret and the D at the same time, sometimes it like buzzes weird, but that's been the only thing I've found. I also find it interesting that here, if I did this right in the video, they have this little piece here so that if you're just sitting like I am right now playing it, if you didn't have this, it tends to not sit well, but just putting that out, you can put it on your leg and then just play it, and it sits a lot better. It sits better on you if you're sitting down and playing it. So, I personally love the way it looks, the way it feels, and I already have a 5-string, a Warwick 5-string, which is an awesome bass. And so I kind of wanted a backup just in case if I ever play out. I would probably play bass or guitar, not drums. I ain't hauling that set out. But everybody always needs a bass player because nobody likes playing bass. And so I always like a backup when you're on stage in case you break a string or something. And so this is a really, really, I don't know if I'll call it a backup, but this is, now I've got 2 5-strings, and very, very happy that I got this. Next thing is kind of the lull. I don't have the book anymore because I gave it and the 2 other books in the trilogy away. It's called Luna, New Moon, and it's written by an author named Ian MacDonald. I don't like giving up on books. I really, really, really don't. I know people put effort into writing them, and there's just this part of me that I feel like I'm failing if I don't finish a book. It's a silly feeling, but that's the way I am. So it's rare for me to just stop reading a book. It's only happened a couple times. This is unfortunately one of them. And it's sad because, there's lots of authors that have said they love this author, does an astoundingly good job, and high praises for this book. I just got, I don't know, maybe halfway through it, and I finally said, I am not enjoying this at all whatsoever. I can't relate to any of these characters. I don't care about any of them. I don't care about the story. I don't care about what's going on. And I just said, why? This is a waste of time. And so I just stopped. So I gave the books away to, my employer has in the break room, has like a shelf of books that people are giving away. And I just stopped by the office one day and just put them there and said, somebody else maybe will. And that's the thing. I can see where it's written really well. The author, from that perspective, does a great job. So I don't want to just dismiss the books out of hand. So, it's not that. It's just, it didn't resonate with me at all. I couldn't get, like, the book couldn't get its hooks into me and really grab me. I felt like I was struggling to even just pick up the book and start reading it. So, or keep reading it, I should say. So, yeah. People may have a different view of the book, but unfortunately mine is, I can't recommend it. Next book is this one, Instant Replay, which is written by Jerry Kramer. I used to, as a kid, have this book, and I don't know whatever happened in the copy of the book I had. It was, a small paperback, and I used to read books like over and over and over again. I don't do that anymore. because I have too many of them. I got to get through them all. But I used to go through books a lot, and I remember rereading and rereading that book all the time. And again, I lost it. I don't know where it went, and I just stumbled across this. I don't remember where, and I thought, I'm going to pick this up, and I did, and now I've read it again, and it's a fun book to read because he kept this diary when the Packers went to Super Bowl II, and Kramer, he was recording himself. He was also then writing these along with Dick Schaap, who helped him write it. He's a co-author of the book as well, and it's just fun to go back in the '60s, late '60s, and just see the views that people had. And how things were, I wish I would have gone through and found a couple of phrases that stuck out, but, it's a monument of its time, in that how, race was viewed in the late 60s, and Lombardi was actually, not just from this book, from what I read about him, is that he was very progressive, in terms of his views. He's always got that persona of being like really strict and barking at all his players, but he also loved them very much, and he's very adamant against racism. That's also illustrated in the book. And from what I've read, apparently one of his brothers, or a brother, was gay, and he was very adamantly against people who were homophobic. So again, that's from what I've read. So the point is there are some things, though, in the book that you have to remember. It's written in the late 60s, and it does have that historical perspective on it. That said, it's just really interesting to read about how, the players back then, it didn't seem like the fitness was what it is right now, and how they train and how they handle themselves throughout the year. I'm not a big football fan anymore. I don't really follow football much anymore. I'll look at a score now and then, but I don't sit down and watch games anymore. But it's still part of how I grew up, especially in Wisconsin, being a Packer fan. And even if you're not a Packer fan, I would highly recommend reading this book. It's a fun, interesting read into that world. Okay, the next book is the last of the 3 Alien books I read over January, and this is considered to be a young adult book. Alien Echo by Mira Grant. So I had heard a couple of mixed views of this. I think it was some people just saying, oh God, here comes a young adult book in the alien world. It's going to suck. I don't agree with that. I actually enjoyed reading this book. It's from the perspective of a girl, I think she's 16 or 17 or something like that. And they're on a planet, which it's interesting because the planet is very colorful. If you didn't know that this was an alien book and you just were reading it, it would sound like, and you didn't know what Weyland-Yutani was, because that's briefly mentioned at the beginning. You'd think, this is just, teenagers in the future on a colonization planet. And I thought that was such a cool, because a lot of books in Alien are military or cold research facilities or, sterile research facilities. This seemed very, very different setting, and I like that. I've heard some people criticize the book because it's all about this girl who finally was like meeting somebody that she really wanted to be with, and then struck a relationship with another girl, and that she always talked about kissing her and stuff like that. Whatever. I mean, it's perspective from somebody, and I don't think it was handled immaturely. It's just, it is what it is. And I also will say that out of all the books, all 3 Alien books that I read, they all bring in characters. This is pretty, this is the main characters, who they are. And there are other characters in the other books that bring in gays and lesbians and things like that. And I think that's awesome, because that's just, it is what it is, and that's the way the world we are in, and that's who she is in this book, and that's who she's attracted to, and great. It wasn't like, oh my God, it just is what it is, and I like that. I really enjoyed that they did that, or that the author did that with the main character, because we need more of that in books, and we need to just have it as it's just a thing. It's just who people are, and good. I like that. The book itself, I think, is good. Again, if you're an Alien fan, I would highly recommend it. Even if you're not, it's kind of an interesting introduction into the world, because obviously things go wrong halfway through the book, and how an alien or aliens are introduced is really interesting, because they're not called xenomorphs. They're not, they don't know what these are. And so it's this main character, she's trying to describe what she's seeing and what's going on. And I also thought that was a cool take on it. So, fun book, definitely recommended. Next one is this puzzle that I got. I do like collecting puzzles, and I'm going to do hopefully some videos on that this year. But this is an Octahedron puzzle, I think is what it's called. And I don't know who makes it. I forgot the name of it. But as you can see, it turns like this. And so you basically turn the faces like that, and so forth. Okay. I have not scrambled it because I fear for my life that I would never be able to figure out how to solve it again. But I like this. I definitely think it's a good puzzle. It turns really easy. Does a corner cut? I don't know. But it is just because you have to get used to turning the faces. You have to turn kind of like one at each time. But I will eventually scramble this if I can find a resource online that talks about how you approach unscrambling it and solving it. But if you're into puzzles, definitely recommend that one. It's a good one. Next book, Mind and Matter, from John Urschel. So John was a football player, and he played for Penn State. He eventually played for the Baltimore Ravens as a lineman for about 3 years. And he also, as he was growing up, loved science, was really good at math, though he really didn't, like he says in the book, it seems like he really didn't fully get into it until he got to college, and then he realized just how much he enjoyed it. He talks about a couple of the papers that he's written, and it's like reading the proof from Wiles on Fermat's last theorem. I looked at the first page and I went, I have no hope. So the stuff that he does as research is also things that are really over my head. But he does a good job in the book of talking about things that he's done in mathematics and bringing it to a level that's for the layperson. So that's good. Highly recommend this book. I really, really enjoyed it. It talks about his, he played football and he got to play at the professional level, but he was also going to MIT for his doctorate. So this dude is serious. People think, oh, football player, they don't know, they don't know what they're doing. This guy is, I think at this point, either he is or he's almost finished with his PhD at MIT. That is serious. Okay, this guy knows his stuff inside and out. And I've seen some interviews with him as I was reading this book. Very well spoken. I hope this guy really gets out, and because he already is, but even more gets out and advocates and gets more people interested in mathematics, and because I think he could be an awesome spokesperson for what he does. I think eventually the thing right now is, here's a football player and he's also a mathematician, and which one does he choose? In the book he does talk about that, but now that he's retired and he's fully focused on his PhD and becoming a professor and living that life, I think that aspect will eventually fade. But I hope he doesn't fade. I hope he does write more in the future, not just with papers that he does in his career, but also books like this, because I think I'm serious to say I think this guy could easily become somebody like a Hawking or somebody that's like that they're really, really smart and they know their stuff inside and out, but they can relate it to people in terms that are pretty easy to understand. I definitely think he has that potential, and this book shows that. So highly recommend reading it. It was a really good book. Okay, this next one, again, is another instrument, and I felt so lucky that I found this. So this is a PRS 7-string, Paul Reed Smith. And I have a Paul Reed Smith. I got it in 1996, 95 or 96. And I got it primarily because Alex Lifeson, guitarist from Rush, was starting to play PRSs. And I have my original 2 Charvels from when I was growing up in high school, the metal guitars. And they're good. I still have them, and they play really nice. But I didn't want to have the tremolo bar. I wanted something that was just versatile, robust, sounded good with a lot of different styles, and that PRS definitely fit the bill. I'm not, a guitar collector, and PRS guitars, they ain't cheap. I'm not going to say how much I paid for that back in the 90s, but it was not a small endeavor, but I really wanted something like that. And so as I said, when I been buying my drum heads, I just looked up 7-string PRS, and this was a demo model that they had. Because, yeah, if you can actually see, there's like a little dent in one of the volume knobs, and then on the back somewhere, there's apparently like a 1-inch little scuff on it. I can't see it. I honestly cannot see it. And this thing just plays beautifully. I love just the sound just naturally without even plugging it in. Does not have the tremolo bar. It's a 7-string. I've always wanted a 7-string. So for the price that they were asking for it, I'm like, oh my God, I have to get this. I absolutely have to get it. So still wasn't like cheap, but it was definitely much less than even I bought that thing for. So the only thing is it's on the back, it says built by some company in Indonesia under exclusive license for PRS guitars. And so part of me goes, was it really made in the PRS thing in America? But it's also got the bird inlays. So I'm like, I don't care. It's a PRS. It is a 24 fret too. I've always wanted a 24 fret, and I'm very, very happy that I found this, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to get this guitar. It's a beautiful, beautiful guitar, and I love the look of it. It's kind of like a black with grayish tones on the wood grain, sort of. It's amazing to look at. I love this thing. It's so pretty. So yeah, very happy that I got this. Okay, we got just a couple things left. The next thing is a book, The Resurrectionists by Michael Collins. So this is a book that seems to be set, if I remember right, in the 70s. It's written from first person from a guy that is married to somebody who she was married to somebody that had her first kid with, and he is on death row. Not the kid, the ex-husband. And then they got together and they had a kid who's now like 5 years old. The main character, his father dies. They're out in New Jersey. His father dies in Michigan. And so he basically takes his family and heads to Michigan, and they end up stealing like a car to get there. And that's about as much as I'm going to say about the plot, because as the plot goes through, it's kind of almost like a mystery in a way, and that you have to unravel who is really who and what's going on in this main character's past, and so you have to unravel all this stuff. I really enjoyed it. I think this book was written very, very well. The story was engaging to me. There's one phrase that is said constantly, and I don't know if it's like a Michigan thing. Let me see because they say it all the time. Let's see if I can find it. Where do they say this? Come on. Now I said they say this all the time. You hear me. Everything is, we got to go there. You hear me? It's like said constantly throughout the book. Or at least I picked up that it feels like it's said constantly through the book. I don't know if that's a Michigan phrase or not, but yeah, or maybe it's Irish, because I think the author is originally from Ireland. But no matter what, I found it funny that I just picked up on it. That was said a lot. But again, highly recommend the book. It's like a drama mystery almost type of story, and the ending was pretty satisfying, and I liked it. So I recommend that one. Next is the HBO series Chernobyl. So my wife and I finally watched it. I had seen some of some scenes from not the movie, but the series before, and I've also read a lot about nuclear weapons, nuclear disasters. I can't remember the name of the book, but there's a book that I read before on historical nuclear accidents, which was very telling, Chernobyl being one of them. So I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I know a fair amount of this stuff already. I think also I've read that the series does take some leniencies in terms of characters and how the Soviet regime and how things worked were maybe a little bit too stereotypical, but that doesn't take away from the reality of the story. It is frightening. It is horrific to see how people suffered because, in part, they didn't know what they were dealing with. They didn't understand that, oh, here's a piece of something. What's this? And just by touching it, you're pretty much dead. And how fast these lethal doses of radiation, but these doses of radiation, just how fast it killed these people. There's definitely some scenes that are kind of squeamish. If you don't like, especially when they're in the hospital, if you don't like that stuff, it might be hard to watch, but it's what really happened. And the visual of them looking into the core after it had exploded is hellish. It's like, oh, wow, how this could have gone completely bonkers. Like, I didn't realize until I read about it, and this series also talks about it, is that if they hadn't drained, I think, these tanks or whatever that were underneath the reactor, that the resultant heat of the meltdown material hitting the water would have caused an explosion that would have been catastrophic. And it's like, wow, that could have just gone. I mean, it was already bad, really, really bad, and it could have become, fundamentally catastrophic. So it's acted well, it's done well. It's infuriating to see how these people, even if they over-exaggerated a little bit of this, how it was just not treated with any seriousness, and very, very scary. So I'm glad I watched it. Done really well. Last book, and then I have a movie and another board game to go through. So this is called Relic from Alan Dean Foster. It's essentially humanity has reached the stars and colonized other planets, but for some reason, somebody somewhere creates this malignancy that spreads across the galaxy somehow, I don't know how, and kills all humans except one. He's the Relic, and he is rescued by another alien race who they're very interested in bringing humanity back, and they're very nice to him, but they also kind of treat him somewhat coldly because that's just the way they are. So it was an interesting book. It's kind of, in a way, it's kind of like Alien 3. It's not horrific. It's just in the sense of the original element is really hard to believe. How did something like this go across all these different planets, didn't affect any other creatures from Earth or from other alien worlds, and just affected humans and killed them? It is really hard to buy, but if you just accepted that, it did lead to kind of an interesting story premise. And are there still maybe other humans alive somewhere else? And how this one human is treated as kind of a relic, as almost a specimen, not really treated as, they do treat him as a sentient being, obviously, and they do respect him, but they also have a little bit of a coldness to him as well. So it was a good book. It's one that drew me in. I kept reading it, and it's done well. Again, I find some of it a little far-fetched, but the premise of the story, if you just let it be as it is, it does lead to kind of an interesting storyline. So it's good. Watched a movie called Booksmart, and this is basically about two girls that they are seniors in high school. They've dedicated themselves to being really book smart, getting great grades and getting into the college of their choices, and making sure that their lives were going to be doing the right things and getting into all the good colleges and all that other stuff. And they realize that people that partied or didn't follow the same path that they did got into really good schools or got really good jobs, and they say that the night before their graduation they have to go out and find parties and got to go to parties and stuff like that. This was really good. I really enjoyed this movie. It is a little far-fetched in some spots in terms of students, and I'm like, there was one guy that it doesn't relate to how a family could have that much money that they put on a party that he puts on, and nobody goes to it. It's kind of sad, but it's done well. I did like it. Especially, here's the thing, I'll say this, at the end, because one of the main characters, she's going to go to, I believe, Africa for like a year to do some work there, and the other friend was going to go to Yale, I believe, and so they weren't going to see each other for a while, and so the one drops the other one off at the airport, and you feel like it's going to be the sad ending, but I'm not going to say what happens, but I like the way the movie ended because it didn't do that. I thought it was pretty funny. So I enjoyed it. It's a good movie to watch. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is another board game called Tak, T-A-K, I believe. And apparently this is in a fantasy trilogy of which there are 2 books. The third one, I believe, is kind of in the works. Don't know when it's going to be released, but they've gotten wide acclaim. Patrick Rothfuss, I think how you say his name. But he mentions in the book, I've never read him, but he mentions in the book this game called Tak, and how it's a beautiful board game and how people would, play it. But it's just mentioned kind of briefly, and I don't know how this all evolved, but eventually this became, hey, we should really make a game that is reflective of this description in the book. So they did a Kickstarter, they created this game, and now you can actually go buy the game. So you basically have these pieces that you have to build essentially a path from one end of the board to the other, but pieces can be walls, but you can actually knock down walls with certain pieces. I played this a little bit at a New Year's Eve party with some friends, and my wife and I played it a couple times. It's fun. I definitely would recommend it if you're a board game fanatic. It's a little hard right now to think of good strategy. One thing I noticed when I was playing with people is that it seemed like you would just suddenly win and you didn't really realize, the other person already had by doing this. It seemed like you have to really, really pay attention closely that one sudden move seemed to, boom, you won. And I think that's just because of my novice, abilities at the game. Haven't played it that much at all, but it is a fairly simple game. Again, it's one of those abstract games, fairly simple, but could have a lot of depth and complexity to it. It would be fun to see if this is one of those games that would be hard for a computer to solve. Though AlphaZero figured out Go. So I would be interested to see, as a side note, computer programs try to tackle games like Ingenious, which is a board game I really, really love. Quirkle is a game that my wife and I play a lot, and that's fun, where you have this kind of randomness built in as well. So you have to keep that in mind. I would like to see how, maybe they're easier than Go. Maybe they're not. I'm not sure. But be interesting to see a computer program try to tackle something like Tak. But it's a fun game. So that is all the things. Finally, I'm near the end of my January 2020 review. I kind of imagine February is going to be a little bit less, to say the least. But who knows? Maybe I'll get some movies in there, get some books in there. Probably I'm not going to have any more instruments for a long time, but definitely find things to talk about in February. So thank you all for watching. If you've read any of these books or seen any of these movies or played any of these instruments, similar ones, leave your comments down below. Otherwise, that is all. Thank you for watching.